Anthony Fantano to Earth. Can you hear me, Earth? I hope you're doing well. Internet's busiest music nerd here. Time for a short little tier list for shits and giggles of the Gorillaz catalog. That's what I'm going to do. We're going to go over all of those amazing classic core records. Quick shout out to our sponsor, good people over at The Ridge, still making these awesome nifty metal plated wallets that fit nicely in that front pocket. Hit up that link down below. Use promo code MELON. Get 10% off your order. And that's all you got to know. Gorillaz, legendary virtual band masterminded by Damon Albarn. Musically, anyway, we also have Jamie Hewlett, who, of course, is the co-founder, creator of Gorillaz, who, visualizes the band. And they have a pretty impressive catalog, as you well know. And I'm going to tear out those records, going to tear out those main albums. Let's do it. Starting off with the self-titled 2001 Gorillaz debut, which I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm going to put this solidly in the B tier. It's a good-ass album. By no means is it the clearest and crispest record that Gorillaz, Damon Albarn have pulled together, but there's still some incredible highlights that still sound wonderful to this day. 2000, Clint Eastwood, so on and so forth. Lots of groovy rockin' cuts, creative production that, again, like it's not nearly as vivid or as colorful or even as like cartoony as what you might get on, the latest Song Machine edition, for example. But the record is still very eclectic for its time. And I think took a while for it to legitimately catch on. Even though Gorillaz out of the gate hit with Clint Eastwood, I think it still took them a bit to truly find their audience because it was a record that a lot of people buying it and getting into it, I think they presumed the entire LP would just be a bunch of Clint Eastwoods, but it in fact wasn't. The album was very much a combination of hip hop and rock and electronic music and a host of other things as well. And I think around that time in the early 2000s, a lot of people were not really ready, especially in the mainstream, for an album as stylistically diverse as this one, because, really marketing records and selling records and making sure that your record stayed out of the used bin kind of required, I think, a homogeneity that Gorillaz were willing to buck in the early 2000s, willing to buck during a time when maybe it wasn't the best thing for the band in that moment. But, obviously things popped off more with Demon Days, and I think they really began to find their audience around that time. But again, even if the debut was not as well received or as loved as it should have been for its time, it still has aged very well. It's still a very fun album to listen to, and I think it stands pretty tall in the Gorillaz discography overall. Next, we have the 2005 album Demon Days from Gorillaz, where their lore deepened, their musical influences widened. We also saw legendary producer Danger Mouse coming into the fold for the creation of this LP. A lot of the styles and sounds of the last record were kind of refined on this record. Production abilities refined on this record as well. Not quite as much rock influence on these tracks and more of a dance influence to replace that, especially on cuts such as Dare. We also have other legendary appearances and spots on this record, like from MF Doom, whose wonderful verse on this record is one of the most memorable appearances of any artist in the Gorillaz catalog. There are loads of wonderful cuts, highlights, and bangers on this record. Obviously, Gorillaz had another mega hit on this album with Feel Good Incorporated. Hands down, one of their best records in terms of names involved, production quality, song quality. Anybody who's interested in Gorillaz and what they have to offer musically, I would implore you to maybe start out with this record first, because it's just a great batch of tracks that even if you don't like it, I think this album displays pretty accurately what Gorillaz are really all about. So I would throw it in the A column. Incredible record, great record. Following that, we have the wonderful 2010 album, the follow-up to Demon Days, Plastic Beach, which had an even wider array of guests, more eclectic instrumentals, songs that some of which went on more of a linear progression, like Empire Ants, growing and swelling in exciting, climactic, and cinematic ways. Some of my favorite Gorillaz guest appearances ever appear on this LP, from Yasin Bey, aka Mos Def, Bobby Womack, as well as Lou Reed. Plus, what we also have to take into account here is the story and the lore and the concept behind this album in terms of its approach to environmental concerns, plastic pollution. Now, commercially, this thing didn't have quite, the mega hit, mainstream, single song going off sort of power that the debut or Demon Days did. But, I think the record still has like lots of great material on it that is very catchy, that is really good. Maybe it just, is not quite as instantaneously accessible as some of the band's previous tracks, but I still think Plastic Beach is an incredible record that I can't really say enough positive things about. Feeling an S tier on this. All right, next we have the quick follow-up to Plastic Beach, The Fall, which was a record that was kind of pitched to fans, saying that it was recorded on the road, it was, written and put together, assembled on an iPad, which for, the early 2010s was kind of a novelty. Oh, we're producing mobily, we're doing it on the go, which, is cool. I'm glad that technology is out there. Obviously, it's improved by leaps and bounds in terms of mobile devices themselves, the technology and apps and software you can get on these devices, and, just like how artists have learn to use them and work around them. I mean, another excellent example is, Madlib's record with Freddie Gibbs, Bandana, which he said he made all of those beats on the iPad, and a lot of those instrumentals do still have that classic Madlib feel. So obviously it's not entirely about the technology, but how you use it. And without a doubt, Damon Albarn really went out on a limb with this LP, deciding to craft an album in this way, especially after a record as lush and as star-studded and as huge as Plastic Beach. So while it's interesting that he did it, I still don't really feel like I'm all that crazy about it. The record didn't really appeal to me at the time that it dropped, and it still doesn't now. In fact, I think in some ways it's aged sort of poorly, given that, again, what we know of mobile production. What we're left with on The Fall is just a very dry record, a very flavorless record, a record where Damon is very obviously hitting some serious limitations in terms of what he can do with mixing, with synthesis, with sequencing, and the perks that he's using in his beats. And look, that's not to say I think this record was doomed from the start. Simultaneously, I don't think he's working with the strongest batch of tracks and songs here either. I think if Damon went in a little bit of a lo-fi direction for a record and decided that for that LP, he was going to write his hardest bops, his biggest singles, just like banger after banger after banger, it would be another story. But the fact of the matter is, on The Fall, the songwriting is so much more abstract as well. And would that abstract songwriting be a little more interesting if the sound palettes were a bit more lush, or the production were a bit more intricate? Probably. So not only was The Fall a bit of a change and a step down from the sound quality we typically got from Gorillaz records, but it was a real shift in terms of the songwriting quality and style as well. As it seemed in this moment, Damon wasn't really chasing after any sort of pop sensibility, and I suppose that's fine. The record really seems to be more about the process. There are some intriguing moments here and there, but all in all, I think The Fall is a pretty drab record. Honestly, I'm feeling a D on it. Swing! Here we have the next official Gorillaz LP in 2017, which, again, was a little bit of a wait since Plastic Beach and The Fall, which, the way it was recorded and released, it felt almost like it was a detour in a way. Humans felt like, conceptually, like the real successor to Plastic Beach, and as a result of that, and with the, change to more of like a CGI art style, there was a lot of anticipation for this record. It's just a shame that it didn't turn out all that great. It's kind of a cluttered mess. Some of the worst songwriting I think Gorillaz have ever done, if you could even call some of what's going on this record songwriting. It felt like much of the time Damon was just kind of like producing beats that didn't really have all that much flavor or personality, nothing with that, for the most part, that cartoony, distinct Gorillaz style. and then just kind of putting artists and vocalists and singers and rappers on top of that, that he liked, that he enjoyed. And, it's cool that Damon allows himself to just kind of let his music fandom push him toward who he wants to work with. But on this record, I feel like it didn't really pan out the best, because I think the vision of Gorillaz, who Gorillaz is, the idea that this is a Gorillaz album as opposed to like a compilation of your beats with a bunch of guest artists on it that you like. It was kind of lost in the process, because again, the biggest things working against this LP were a loss of identity. It didn't really feel like a Gorillaz album. There was no balance between Gorillaz, Damon's voice, and the guests. And the record overall was kind of a slog as well, like not the best or most exciting track list or flow either. Just a lot of things weighing this album down, in my opinion. And I would most likely put it in the D tier as well. It's got a few highlights on it, but it's just not an album overall that I get all that much from. Next, we have 2018's The Now Now, which is a record that when it hit, it was almost as if Gorillaz were establishing a pattern here. When we went from Plastic Beach to The Fall, now we're going from Humans to The Now Now. And this record as well felt very singular, wasn't nearly as, I guess, recorded on the lo-fi end as The Fall was, but it was a record that had a lot more focus than Humans did, was more stripped down, and emotionally was a lot more reserved as well. While I think this is one of Gorillaz' more focused records, I also think it's one of their blander records as well, as many of the songs on this thing are kind of spacey, very atmospheric. There's a serious sense of malaise plaguing a lot of the tracks on this record. There's some decent songwriting and some good highlights, but it's not a very vivid album. It's a listenable one, it's a likable one, but it's not a mind-blowing one, in my opinion. I would put it in the C tier. And finally, here we have, at least for now, what is the latest Gorillaz record, Song Machine Volume 1, which is a great album, which is a very good album. I'm going to put it in the B section. It's very good. Highly recommend it. It's got a lot of great tracks on it. It's not nearly as, I think, groundbreaking as Demon Days, or as like conceptual or as epic as Plastic Beach was, but it's got a lot of bops. It's got a lot of bangers. I'm praying that there's going to be a volume 2 at some point soon. And, to kind of dress this album down very quickly, like it's all about single power. It's all about singular tracks being condensed into miniature moments, hitting as hard as they possibly can within a short amount of time. It's got a lot of guests packed into it, much in the same way that Humans did, but I do think there's a much greater balance between 2D's voice, the voice of the guests, and, the overall songwriting vision that Gorillaz had on this record. It really feels like we have, complete coherent songs on this record, and we're bringing people in to sort of enhance them and complete them. And they do in a variety of fantastic ways, like the guest appearances on this LP, and even the extra tracks on this project are great, are wonderful, are absolute bangers. Some of the most memorable moments in the Gorillaz discography, like the Elton John appearance, the Schoolboy Q appearance, and even again, like on those extras, there's some killer moments, like the JPEG Mafia and Chai track as well. I will also say this record features some of the most colorful and eclectic production that Damon has ever brought to the table, and I am absolutely in love with that. The beats on this thing are so vivid, they're so wonderful, they're so captivating, and really sort of play up that Gorillaz lore. As you're listening to the music on this thing, you feel like you're being kind of transported into that animated parallel universe they exist in. And I think this record is really great, and overall we have a solid and enjoyable catalog from Gorillaz thus far, which I'm very much looking forward to seeing some additions to, and hopefully the near future, please, Damon. So that's going to be it. That is my tier list here. I love you guys. Let me know yours down in the comments, and I apologize if I said column at any point in a way that I was not supposed to be saying it. Love you so much. Over here next to my head is another video that you could check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Gorillaz forever.